Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. 11 out of 23 races are done. 12 to go, so we're technically not even halfway through the season, which is mad to think. It's been a wild one, it's been crazy. Today, I thought it would be fun to go through the season, give my opinion on how the drivers have done, rate everyone, biggest surprises, biggest letdowns, best moments, worst moments, all that good stuff. This is a long one. I'm not going to spend too much time on the intro, but before we get started, a quick word from today's video sponsor. Of course, it's Squarespace. Squarespace helps bring your website ideas to life, right? And even if you're someone who's got very specific ideas of what you want, Squarespace definitely can help you out. All websites optimized for mobile, which isn't always the case. There's nothing worse than an unoptimized website on your phone. Does my head in. There's countless ways you can showcase and display any kind of imagery you want on your site. Loads of different ways of going about that. And there's SEO tools built in, baked into Squarespace to make discoverability way easier. If you're interested, head to squarespace.com via the link down in the description below. I always like to emphasize this. You can play around with it. You can have a go completely free of charge. It's only when you want to put that website that you've been tinkering with live to the rest of the world that you have to pay anything. And when that time does come, if you want to use the code TOMMOF1 at checkout, I would appreciate that. Or give the link in the top line description a tap for 10% off your first website or domain. Right, let's get into the report. So first, I think we've got to briefly go through every race, all 11 this year. I have watched through all of the highlights on the F1 channel at 1.5 times speed just to get through it a bit quicker. And I'm going to rattle through it as quickly as I can. We started in Bahrain. Max put it on pole, Mazepin binned it almost immediately, Gasly lost his front wing, Seb punted Ocon, and Max Verstappen wasn't able to get the move done on Lewis, on track anyway. Hamilton took the W, and Tsunoda with P9 on his debut took my driver of the weekend. Next to Imola, Lewis on pole, but Max sent it at the start and took the lead. Mick dropped it warming his tyres, and Latifi punted Mazepin. Then chaos, Lewis dropped it overtaking back markers in the wet, and then Bottas and Russell came together in a huge way. Sergio had a mare with a bunch of spins and Supermax won the race. Lando got his first podium of the season and my driver of the weekend. Portimao next with Bottas on pole. Raikkonen drove into his teammate. Verstappen slipped by Lewis on the restart, but Hamilton got him back a few laps later. All the overtakes happened into the first corner. Lewis won the race and Fernando Alonso took my driver of the weekend. Probably the dullest race so far. Catalunya is usually a bit meh, but it wasn't too bad this year. Lewis poled it, but Max once again fully sent it into turn one and took the lead. Charles held off Valtteri for ages, which got him my driver of the weekend award. Max looked good for the win, but Mercedes and Lewis did a hungry strategy and two stopped to take the victory. Now to Monaco. Quali was a madness. Charles binned it, but kept his P1 start. Sadly, the car couldn't make the start, so Max took the lead. Bottas's wheel wouldn't come off, Norris lapped Ricciardo, and Lewis couldn't jump Gasly and Vettel in the pits. Max won the race, Carlos and Lando finished the podium, and Sebastian Vettel took my driver of the weekend with a P5. Baku next, and this was a mad one. Leclerc poled it for the second weekend in a row, but quickly got swallowed up by Lewis and Max. Sainz locked up before the castle, and Perez jumped Hamilton in the pits. Then Tyregate. Stroll first, then Max Verstappen, both with random tyre failures down the long straight. Perez inherited the lead, but Lewis should have jumped him off the restart. Two words, brake magic. Perez, Vettel, Gasly podium, Hamilton in the bin, with Vettel taking my drive of the weekend for the second race running. Circuit Paul Ricard is usually a bore fest, but this was anything but. Max put it on pole, but bottled the first corner, giving Lewis the lead. Into the pit stops though, Max managed to pull off the undercut. He ended up behind both Mercedes after pulling the two-stop, but pulled back on fresher rubber to win. Sergio got P3 and all. But George Russell secured my drive of the weekend, a P12 in a Williams in a race with 0 DNFs. Quality. Styria now. Austria race 1 of 2. Max on pole, stays on pole and checks out to be frank. Carlos pops Gasly's rear left. Russell broken-hearted with a DNF in the points because of hydraulic issue. Dominant from Verstappen, worthy winner and driver of the weekend. Even gave us a little burnout over the line to celebrate. And then we went again. Max put it on pole again with Lando P2. No Mercedes in the top 3. Ocon gets sandwiched, but then Gravelgate begins. Norris pushes Perez wide onto the gravel. Then Perez pushes Leclerc wide onto the gravel twice. Bottas and Norris get past Hamilton. Seemingly through damage, he got into turn 1 sausage curb. Another convincing Verstappen win with Lando P3 taking my driver of the weekend. Oh yeah, and Kimi just randomly crashed into Seb. And now to Silverstone, the least controversial race of the season. Max qualified P1, but Lewis was right on his chuff, down the Wellington Straight, through Brooklands and approaching Copse Corner. We all know what happened next. Red flag, Charles led the way and Lewis served a 10-second penalty. Vettel dropped it on his own, Charles was scared of his engine and Norris had a shocker of a pit stop. Hamilton pulled it back, passing Charles with just a few laps to go, winning the race. Don't worry though, Charlie, you still took my driver of the weekend. And then there was Hungary, race 11 of 11. Qualifying didn't bring up too many surprises with Hambot Ver starting 3, but my word, what a race. Bottas and Stroll went bowling into the first corner, taking out Verstappen, Perez, Norris, Leclerc and Ricciardo. Lewis looked on for an easy day, but didn't pit for slicks. He started the race all alone, but pulled it in straight after. Ocon and Vettel ran away at the front, with Latifi holding up the train in third. Hamilton made his way through the pack, with Max's Red Bull heavily damaged. He was unable to do better than P10. He only had one bloody barge ball. Fernando put on a defensive masterclass to keep Lewis behind and protect his teammate Esteban Ocon. A worthy driver of the weekend and double Williams points, finally. And brief. This season has been a madness. I mean, Hungary was my favourite race. Baku was quality. Silverstone was very, very interesting. I've been loving this season so far. Honestly, this season overall, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. It's just been quality. I've loved it. Proper title fight at the front. The rest a complete cluster. Lando still P3 ahead of Perez and Bottas. Williams up to P8 in the Constructors too. Anybody's guess for how this season finishes, which is exactly what we want to see. There's been cracking racing all season this year, but which 3 moments have stood out to me as my top 3, my best 3 moments of the year? Well, at number 3, and maybe it's recency bias, but I'm going with Fernando Alonso's defensive masterclass against Lewis, because Lewis had made his way through the field from P14, overtaken pretty much everyone, battling for 5th place, I think Alonso was at the time. He made that car as wide as a bloody barge. Like, the way he kept Lewis behind for so long, always giving just about enough room, never overstepping the mark, but pushing him so close. Mr. Alonso has not lost his wheel-to-wheel racecraft, has he? At number 2, I am putting Sebastian Vettel's P5 at Monaco. Not either of his podiums, but his P5, because this for me was the first race where things started to turn around, you know what I mean? Ever since that crash 2018 Hockenheim, I don't think Seb's been the same driver. He's looked very uncomfortable at Ferrari, particularly last season. He finished the season P13, 65 points behind his teammate Charles Leclerc. 65. When the move to Aston happened, obviously I hoped things would get better, but did I actually realistically think they would? I wasn't convinced, and when the season started, it wasn't great either. 2 P15s, 2 P13s, his teammate beating him 3 of those 4 races as well. But then Monaco came around, a proper driver's test, and Seb got it into Q3 in qualifying. Aston pulled out a fantastic strategy. Seb nailed the race. He was my driver of the weekend that weekend. This was an old Seb performance, a Seb that we want to see back. We want to see challenging at the top, because we know on his day he's one of the best. Sure, he got his P2 at Baku. Sure, he got his P2, which has been taken away at Hungary. Great performances. But for me, Monaco, that moment, Seb driving so well at that venue, that was really special. And then my moment of the year, no surprises here. Again, it just happens to have been at Hungary again, is Esteban Ocon's win. Of course it is. Look, Esteban held off 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel for over 60 laps. I can't remember exactly how many he led that race for. Didn't make a single mistake when you've got Seb within a second and a half, 2 seconds, that whole time, to not cave into that pressure. Esteban's never won a race before. He's still a young driver. Look, I get Fernando had a fantastic race, don't get me wrong, and Fernando, without Fernando's help, Esteban wouldn't have won that race. But at the same time, like, credit where credit is due to Esteban Ocon. That was unreal, especially, again, he'd had a good start to the year, then he had a few poor performances, and it was just like, this felt like retribution. He got his new chassis and he had a decent result at Silverstone P9, comes in here, capitalises on a lot of others' misfortune, and only goes and wins the bloody race. I was absolutely gassed for him. You could see it on Backseat Driver. I was so happy. Easy moment of the season so far for me. But where there are good moments, there are bad moments. So what about my 3 worst moments of the season? Well, in P3, there's a bunch that I could have put here, but I've gone with Daniel Ricciardo being lapped by Lando Norris at Monaco. Daniel has really struggled jumping into that car. He struggled in a similar way, if you ask me, when he first jumped into that Renault. I don't know if he's the most adaptable driver, perhaps, but getting lapped by your teammate at Monaco, a race that Daniel won in his Red Bull days as well. Should have won twice, really. He's just, That hurt. I mean, I love Daniel and I love Lando, but that hurt. My Daniel side really hurt then. Daniel's been massively outperformed this season by his younger teammate. And look, hopefully, give it time, he'll turn it around. But there's been the odds glimmer. Like Silverstone was decent for Daniel, but other than that, he's been firmly second best. And number 2, we've got Tiregate at Baku. Look, Max, Lance both had huge speed tyre failures. I mean, both walked away okay. You could tell how stressed Lance was on the radio, crashing where he crashed. Motorsport's dangerous. I mean, we saw what happened at Brands Hatch last week. We saw on the same day what happened at Spa. Insane accidents. Like, we have to take this stuff seriously, and it's unacceptable for tyres to just blow for no good reason, because the teams, like Red Bull was saying on the radio, there was no data to suggest that Max's tyre was about to pop, and it did. You know, Pirelli seemed to have beefed up the tyres since then, but that was a very, very questionable moment, because particularly Max coming towards the pits, if he spears in a different direction, that could end very differently. That not only robbed Max and Lance of good results, but it's just not acceptable. And then at number 1, it has to be, of course it is, it's Max and Lewis coming together at Silverstone. Look, we were robbed of what would have been a great battle. It was a great wheel-to-wheel battle up until that point. I think Lewis was definitely more at fault. He understeered, didn't hit the apex, didn't slow down the car enough. They came together. That sucks. But what was even worse, to be honest, like more than any of that was the reaction from both sides. You had people celebrating Max crashing, which is just like, what's wrong with you? And then you had absolute scumbags pulling out, like, saying the nastiest stuff you can possibly imagine to Lewis Hamilton online. The toxic, the negative side of, you know, it's a minority, I think, of people out there. But Twitter was a horrific place after that. And I think there's a lot of people out there who should be hanging their heads in shame with how they conducted themselves around that. Because, you know, you've got 2 drivers pushing, and, you know, it's fine margins. They're going 180 miles an hour, and these things are going to happen. All right, it's Formula One. It's the nature of the sport. But we've got to do better. We've got to be more empathetic. We've got to start treating these people like human beings, because that's who they are. And Lewis didn't deserve the stick he got. Max didn't deserve the stick he got. It's just embarrassing, really. But anyway, on to more positive stuff. So when I've been working on this video, I put a question out to my channel members asking for some help in terms of, you know, what kind of sections should I put in? And long-term channel member Luca Blore, big up Luca, suggested that I should do something to kind of compare drivers this year to how they performed last year. So what I've done here is compare how many points every single driver who's raced this season and last season has achieved compared to how many they achieved this time last season after 11 races. There's 4 new drivers this year: Schumacher, Mazepin, Tsunoda and Alonso. Almost got that wrong. So of those 16 drivers who have driven both seasons, 6 have less points than they did this time last year. Bottas is down 53, Stroll 39, Hamilton 35, Ricciardo 28, Gasly 3 and Giovinazzi is 2 points down. I guess Lewis has been losing out to Max, and Bottas has been losing out to Perez and Lando. Stroll, I mean, last year's Racing Point was much stronger and he had a pretty good start to the season, Lance did, so that explains his minus 39. Ricciardo, we've already talked about him having a shocker this year. Gasly, 3 points down. I mean, he's been unlucky this year, but also he had that win at Monza last year, which obviously added 25 points to his score. And then Gio with just 1 point this year. Any guesses to the only driver who's on the exact same number of points last year as this year? Kimi Räikkönen. He was on 2 and he is on 2 now. And then on to the big winners. Here we go. No big surprises. Who's at the top? Lando Norris, 48 points more than he scored this time last season. 48. Proportionally, that's huge. Verstappen's 40 up. Perez is 34 up. I mean, he's in a Red Bull. That pink Mercedes was pretty good, but not as good as this Red Bull. Sainz 32 up, which is very good. Leclerc 17, Vettel 13. Would have been 31 up, Sebastian, if he hadn't have had that disqualification at Hungary. And then obviously Latifi, Russell, 6 and 4 more, double points at Hungary. And Ocon with that win only puts him 3 points ahead of where he was this time last year. But I do think the Renault package was definitely a more competitive package last year than the Alpine's been so far. But yeah, what can we learn from these figures? I just think they're interesting. Again, you've got transfers going on all over the place. You know, all the cars have changed relative to one another, so you can't really compare these directly. But And it's just interesting to see who's, lost out and gained the most compared to last year. Okay, now I want to talk about my 3 biggest surprises of this year. People that I think have over-delivered based on my expectations going into this season. And number 3, I'm putting Carlos Sainz. I've rated Carlos for a while now, but considering how much Sebastian struggled in that Ferrari, I was not expecting Carlos to jump in and get up to pace and get close to Charles as quickly as he has. It was almost straight away. Oh, there's something in my eye. Ow. He's currently 3 points ahead of Charles in the driver's title, obviously helped by Vettel's disqualification, which got him P3 at Hungary, his 2nd podium of the season. That's 1 more than Charles has got, I'm just saying. For sure, I think Charles has done a better job over the course of the year. He's been more consistent. But again, when you consider Carlos has just jumped into this car, mad impressive. And number 2, I'm going with Lando Norris. Because again, coming off last year, Lando had a great season last year at McLaren. I was like, cool, it's going to be like more of the same, a little bit more. I mean, I thought Daniel Ricciardo was going to have the measure of him. And not only is Daniel under-delivered, but I think Lando's massively over-delivered and made Daniel's job even more difficult. Because, I mean, like, he's been so good. So good. 5 points ahead of a Mercedes, 9 points ahead of a Red Bull by 11 races in. We're in double-digit races and he's still ahead. Points finishes in every single race, if you exclude Hungary, because he was taken out. I mean, he's only 21 still. Like, if he's given the right package, I've got no doubt in my mind he could win a driver's title. The step up this year has been insanely impressive. I wasn't expecting it to be this significant. And then who's my number 1? Look, if you watch my preseason predictions, you know exactly who I'm going to say now. It's obviously Fernando Alonso. I was expecting a mediocre level Alonso to come into this sport. Still not a bad driver, but just nothing special. I was so wrong. Humble pie. Got to take the L on that because he's just massively exceeded my expectations. Massively. It took a little while to get going. His first few races weren't massively impressive. Ocon did have the better of him at the start of the year, but that was my expectation anyway because, I mean, he's just turned 40. He's had 2 years out of the sport and he wasn't exactly coming from the, he was at that dodgy McLaren. But man, he's on 6 points scoring finishes in a row. 8 out of 11 races this year he's finished in the points in an Alpine, which is maximum the 5th best car. That and the AlphaTauri and the Aston Martin are all pretty close. If anything, the AlphaTauri might be a bit clear, actually. I can't recollect him making a single mistake this year. No spins, no into the wall. Maybe he has, but I can't remember. And then Hungary came along and he just put in this Herculean defence against Lewis Hamilton, which was just an absolute, like, everyone who knows what they're talking about, more than I do, actual racing drivers, was just like, Fernando Alonso, fair play. And even I can see that, how good that was. And you know what, on top of all that, like, again, I've said that I've not liked the way Fernando's conducted himself in the past, but this Fernando that we've got, this 39, 40-year-old Fernando that's come in alongside Ocon, just seems in a way more positive, I don't know, mature mindset. And I'm loving this Fernando Alonso, and I'm really happy that he's back, which is not something I would have said at the start of the season. And where there are positive surprises, there are also negative surprises. Disappointments. Who are my top 3 disappointments of the season? Well, in P3, sorry, but it's Valtteri Bottas. I mean, Valtteri's had a struggle this year. He's lower on points relative to Lewis than he's ever been during their partnership at Mercedes. He scored 5 P3s, only 1 P2 all season. No wins in a Mercedes. 3 retirements. Yes, of course, it was unlucky for his wheel to get buggered at Monaco, but, he's made mistakes as well. I expected him to be clear of Perez, slotting in firmly behind Lewis and probably behind Max as well, but just doing that solid job in 3rd, clear in the constructors. But he's only like 4 points ahead of Sergio, who's in a new car, and what we know is a very tricky car, that Red Bull 2nd car, and he's only 4 points ahead of him. Valtteri's been at that team for what, this is his 4th season? No, 5th season, isn't it? Yet Valtteri's 79 points adrift of Max and behind a McLaren in the driver's title. Like, it's just not been good enough. In 2nd place, I've gone with Yuki Tsunoda. Now, I love Yuki. He was my favourite driver in F2 last season. I followed F2 much more than I'm following it this year. Last year, I was fully invested in Yuki. I think he got the call up reasonably on merit. He was only 1 point beyond Kanemaila. And after the first weekend at Bahrain, he put in a driver of the weekend performance, if you ask me. P9, solid race for his first ever race in F1. I thought, damn, this kid's good. He's the real deal. But 11 races in, is 11-0 down to Gasly in qualifying. Hasn't beat him in a race in terms of when there hasn't been an issue for Gasly. When it's just been firm, one against the other, Gasly's always got the better of him. He's very explosive on the radio, which, you know, I love Juan Pablo Montoya getting a bit lippy on the radio. I've got time for that, but he's a young driver and he needs to chill it down a bit to get, because it's not going well for him, and being so aggressive on the radio isn't going to help his cause. And then you've got to acknowledge the fact that he has had a bunch of crashes. He's had a bunch of spins. He's hit the wall a bunch of times. Yes, you're allowed that as a rookie. He's a diamond in the rough. I've said that before. I do believe that. But I mean, he's very rough at the minute, and are Red Bull going to be patient enough, especially with Honda pulling out at the end of this year? Because again, that Honda connection helped Yuki get that seat. Will they be patient enough with him? Yuki needs to step it up to the rest of this year. He needs to get a couple of scalps, because you look at what Alonso did to Van Dorn at McLaren. Like, that could quite easily happen to Yuki Tsunoda. And then in first place, obviously it's Daniel Ricciardo. He's a 7-time race winner with loads of it, over 10 years experience in the sport, and he's being comfortably beaten by his teammate right now. It must be tough for Daniel. I get it, but he's got to step it up. I mean, you know, McLaren have spent a lot of money on him. And again, like I say about Sebastian, when they've got a car that they're comfortable in, a package that they believe in, they're two of the best around. But if they don't have that, they really struggle. They don't seem to have that adaptability that a Fernando, a Carlos has. Daniel needs to get on top of that car quick if he wants to help McLaren get third in the constructors, because Ferrari are right there, and both drivers at Ferrari are looking pretty comfortable. And finally, let's run through from 20 to 1 how I've ranked all of the drivers over the first 11 races this season. You're going to disagree with some of these, so get your pitchforks out. It's fine. Okay, I'll do my best to explain myself, but if that isn't good enough for you, then so be it. P20, Nikita Mazepin, not short of an incident, although he's not the only one guilty of having a bunch of offs. Way slower than his teammate Mick Schumacher, which again, look, if it's a teammate who's got loads of experience in the sport, you can kind of forgive that a bit, but it's Mick's junior season as well. And, you know, Nikita's averaging like 30, 40 seconds down the road by the end of most races, and is always getting beaten in qualifying, apart from when Mick crashes in FP3 and doesn't actually get to run the session, which we will talk about in a bit. But yeah, sorry, Nikita, P20. P19, I'm going Yuki Tsunoda. That might be a bit harsh to a lot of you, but I've been really disappointed. Like, my expectations of Yuki, especially after Bahrain, have been really high, but he's just been thoroughly destroyed by his teammate Pierre Gasly. Again, credit to Gasly, but Yuki's needs to step it up, because I've been very, very disappointed. Maybe it's because I want him to do well. Maybe I've got higher expectations of him than I should, but come on, Yuki, mate, step it up. P18, this might seem harsh as well, but I'm putting Kimi Räikkönen. Now, Kimi's race performances haven't been that bad. He's been beaten pretty convincingly in qualifying by Giovinazzi, which isn't a good thing. But actually in the races, it's 6-5 to Kimi. But Kimi drove into Giovinazzi and drove into Sebastian Vettel at, what was it, Portimao and Austria, respectively. Those two incidents were so bad. I'm sorry, he just wasn't concentrating, and I think that's really bad. Like, it's all well and good a driver pushing, making a mistake, but that's a different level for me. And I think, you know, Kimi's positioning on here has suffered for that, because it's just not acceptable. I'm sorry, it's just not. P17, I've put Nicholas Latifi. Now, massively outperformed by George in terms of qualifying this season. He's come close a couple of times, to be fair, but George has consistently had the measure of Latifi. You look at the results as well. The race finishes, George has always finished most of the time ahead of Latifi. But then Latifi put in a quality Hungarian Grand Prix and ended up finishing P7 with Seb's disqualification. Got 6 points. George got 4, 10 points for Williams now. And credit, because Latifi, as much as actually he had the slowest lap time of any car, bar the ones that got taken out, of any car during the race, yet he still managed to put it home P7. So, but look, he did a great job. And I've got to give him credit. He probably would have been P19 on this list if it wasn't for Hungary, to be honest. But I've given him a little bit of a bump up. Well done, Nicholas. P16, Daniel Ricciardo. I've already talked about him this year. I just hope he gets better. Not much more to say. P15, I've gone for Antonio Giovinazzi. Again, done a very good job in quali against Kimi. But again, 6-5 down in the races, even though he's qualified 8-3 up. And that's with Giovinazzi's classic, really good starts. Just race pace just hasn't been good enough, and it's been unlucky. But it's just been a bit of a meh season for Antonio. I don't think he's been good enough to secure his seat in that Alfa Romeo. Definitely not. P14, I've gone with Mick Schumacher. Now that might seem quite generous, the fact that he's crashed twice in FP3 and then not made qualifying, which is a bit of a cardinal sin. But he has beaten his teammate Mazepin in every qualifying session that they've both made. He is way ahead of his teammate, and he put in some great wheel-to-wheel battles at Hungary with Max Verstappen. You know, F2 title winner. The kid's got talent. I think P14 is pretty fair. P13, it's Valtteri Bottas, I'm afraid. It's been a bad season for Valtteri. Again, this is the furthest behind Lewis has ever been, as them two as a combination, like percentage-wise. Yeah, 53 points down on this time last year. Yes, Red Bull have stepped up, but at the same time, like, it's just not been good enough. P12, I've gone for Lance Stroll. Now, Lance has had a very... of everyone in this list, I think Lance has had the most season. Like, there's not been any massive highs or any super low lows. He's very unlucky with a tyre blowout at Baku. 4 P8s in an Aston Martin. It's pretty good. Not bad, Lance. Hope to see him kick on for the rest of the year. P11, I have gone with Esteban Ocon. Okay, Hungary race winner. He started the season well. Was it 4 points finishes in a row? Didn't score in Bahrain, but 4 points finishes after that. Then had a few shockers, 2 P14s, 2 DNFs. Was it a chassis problem? Maybe. I mean, you can never say what to what extent. It does seem to have, performances since he changed it have been better, but he got the win. But I need to see more consistency out of Esteban. It feels a bit harsh putting in P11 after a win, but there's been, I think, other better performances through the field. In P10, I'm putting Sergio Perez, another race winner down in P10. Well, look, again, the qualifying gap that he's been putting in on average against Max is about the same as what Alex and Pierre were doing. So on that point, he's not improved relative to those two. It's like 0.45 seconds, I think, and they were about half a second. So it's very, very little in it. He's still way off Max in qualifying. His race pace is better. What I will say is how much of that is to do with the fact that the Red Bull is a better car relative to the Mercedes this year. I mean, of course that factors in because it is a better package. Sergio's not a driver who should be qualifying half a second behind his teammate. We know he's a proven entity. We know how good he is. He's not blown me away this year, which I'm not surprised about because that was always going to be tricky, and I do think there's more to it. I definitely think there's... For 3 drivers, 2 who we know are proven entities in Gasly and Perez, to be so far off Max in the same car tells me that there's something more going on there. But yeah, Sergio P10. In P9, we have... I know some of you are going to be upset by this, but when you look at the results, I think it's just, and I think it's Sebastian Vettel. 2 P2 finishes. We're going to count Hungary because he deserved that P2 for sure. Fantastic. P5 Monaco. Fantastic. He's only finished 3 out of 11 races in the points this year. 4 if you want to include the disqualification. So we'll say 4 because you should. He punted Ocon under the brakes at Bahrain. He spun of his own accord at Silverstone. That could have been a really good point scoring finish. Seb hasn't been consistent enough throughout the course of the season for me to put him any higher than this. But I think the highs have looked very promising. I do expect him to have a much better end of the season overall. It's just them early performances. I mean, yeah, first 4 races outside the points. P8, I'm going Carlos Sainz. Very impressive this year. Been massively impressed with how quickly he's got up to speed with that car. But he has made his fair share of mistakes. I mean, he locked up at Baku, which, you know, took away a pretty good result. He spun in qualifying at Hungary, which actually ended up helping him out, but he still spun in qualifying and hit the wall. This is his 4th team in Formula One, and tell you what, that adaptability is showing. P8 is still good. I mean, he's 8 out of 20. So I think overall he's had a very good season, but I think there's more to come from Carlos as well. P7 was tricky, this. These next few were very tricky. But I've gone Charles Leclerc. high highs, man. 2 pole positions in a row in that Ferrari. Could have won at Silverstone. Like, Lewis got him just at the end. And he looked pretty comfortable for a lot of that race at Silverstone as well. But he is still liable to a bit of him. He took out, Gasly. He just didn't give Gasly space at Austria, popped his rear wheel. Obviously binned it at Monaco, which, yes, he got P1. Would he have still had P1 if he didn't bin it? Impossible to say. And then he couldn't even start the race because he just pushed that bit. Charles, I think, is very guilty of pushing 115%. Rather than 110 where you can still just about hold it. Like, he goes that bit too far. It's massively impressive. Like, again, the highs have been super high, but overall there's been other drivers who have impressed me a bit more this year. P6, I'm saying George Russell. P12 on merit at France is huge in that Williams. That's, for me, bigger than the point scoring at Hungary, because ultimately, it was fortuitous. You had to rely on everyone else taking each other out for them to get points on that day. But that P12 was so close to the points with no one DNFing was so impressive. He's made a couple of Q3 appearances pretty consistently into Q2 as well. Only once he hasn't made it into Q2. Like, again, when you're rating a driver like George, you have to be like, well, how much do you rate Latifi? And I rate Latifi quite high. He's won races in F2. Like, he's not a bad driver, I don't think. I think just George is making him maybe look worse than he is because George, I think, is just doing so well. On to P5, I have gone with title leader Lewis Hamilton. Now, how can you put the title leader in P5, Tommo? What's wrong with you, man? Let me explain. Big mistakes in Imola and Baku, plus a poor showing at Monaco. We're not used to Lewis Hamilton making these kind of mistakes. I think he's made more mistakes this season than we've seen for a while. I think the battle has definitely flustered him a little bit. Don't get me wrong, he's still put in some incredible performances, but I don't think this has been the consistent Lewis that we've come to expect over the last few seasons. I mean, I set very, very high standards of Lewis Hamilton, and the fact that he's leading is huge, but also he was very, very fortunate at Silverstone not to DNF, and that incident was more his fault. So he's had his share of luck at times as well, Still very, very good, don't get me wrong. There's a reason why he's 5th out of 20 here. And number 4, I'm putting Mr. Fernando Alonso. Nando's been on fire. I've already spoken about him loads. I think I've already explained why I think he deserves to be P4 in this list. So in P3, that leaves someone who I think has been going massively overlooked this season, and that's Pierre Gasly. I'm putting him 3rd best driver this year. When you actually look at the performances and the finishes over the course of this year, it's been insane. Now, the AlphaTauri, let's call it the 5th quickest car. Okay, you can't say for sure, maybe 6th, 5th, 6th, that kind of range. Well, he's qualified in the top 6 8 times out of 11 races this year. 8 times. Yuki's not got past Q1. It's 5. It might be 6 times. It's at least 5 times. And if you take away Bahrain, where it was his mistake, he ran into the back of Ricciardo, lost his front wing. You take away Leclerc popping his rear wheel, and you take away the puncture he got at Silverstone, Gasly finished in the points in every race this year, apart from those 3. A P3 in Baku as well. He's been on the podium this year. Again, in hardware that I don't think is at the level of Ferrari, of McLaren. I don't think it's at that level. Yet he is able to deliver so consistently and just so absolutely destroy his teammate. Like, Pierre's been on a mad one this year. I've been so impressed. He was my driver of the year last year. And if he keeps this up, he could be up for the conversation this year. And then that leaves 2. It was always going to be these 2 at the top as far as I'm concerned. These 2 are clear. These 2 have made like no mistakes. I'm sure there's the odd mistake, but like hardly any mistakes this year compared to everyone else. But in P2, sorry, Dutchies, but I'm putting Max Verstappen. Look, Max has barely put a foot wrong. Okay, all the times he's not finished races has been, well, again, Lewis hit him, he had his tyre failure, and he got caught up in the Hungary madness. So in terms of what he's done wrong, he's done very, very, very little wrong. I can't really think of any particular things that Max has done wrong, and he's been so impressive. He's jumped into this car, he's taken the fight to Lewis. It's been so good to see. I really hope, Lewis is a bit ahead now in the driver's title, but I hope Max is going to come back next race and win. I really do, because I want to see this go all the way to the end. But then in P1, it's Lando Norris. The reason I'm putting Lando ahead of Max, because they've both had very, very similar seasons, both quality, I think it is even more impressive for Lando to be P3 ahead of a Mercedes, ahead of a Red Bull when he's in that McLaren package, which isn't as quick as the Red Bull. Max can put it up the top and then battle at the front, and he's got kind of one other car to worry about. Lando's, you know, sometimes he's qualifying in like P6, 7, 8 and still able to put out results and passing other people in cars that are closer to his McLaren. That's for me what sets Lando apart and puts him, just means that he just about takes Max in this list. But both lads have been incredible, but Lando takes it for me. And there we go. This has been a hilariously long video. I'm not looking forward to editing this, not gonna lie. But I've got all the graphics pre-made, so hopefully it should only take about many hours. But thank you everyone. Thank you so much, honestly, for watching. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Their support helps me out a lot, and thank you for supporting the brands that support me. My name continues to be Tommo. That hasn't changed yet. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.